Sarah Mitchell parked her old Jeep in the spacious, nearly empty parking lot of McDonald's that late afternoon. It was hot, as it always was in Arizona, but that didn't bother her. She was focused on one important detail, a reflection in the rearview mirror. The dark circles under her eyes betrayed many sleepless nights, and as she ran her hand through her hair, she felt the weight of her own anxiety. For a moment, she considered leaving, giving up, but she wasn't about to back down now. Today was the day to see John Parker and Carlos Rodriguez again, two friends who had stood by her side in the trenches of a far-off desert. Taking a deep breath, she opened the car door and stepped into the restaurant. The air conditioning hit her face, providing momentary relief. She looked around, trying to spot her friends. The McDonald's was relatively busy for that hour. A group of teenagers was making a ruckus near the counter, while an elderly couple shared a meal at one of the tables by the window. There were also a few employees talking in hushed voices. It all felt so ordinary that it almost seemed strange to Sarah. For so long, she had been alert to imminent dangers, explosions, voices speaking in foreign tongues. But here, it was just everyday people looking for a bite to eat on a late afternoon. She eventually spotted John and Carlos at a table in the corner near a sign advertising cold milkshakes. John looked a little older than Sarah remembered, his hair now flecked with gray, and his face marked by deeper wrinkles. Carlos, on the other hand, still carried the same calm and serene demeanor, though a few strands of white hair were beginning to show. Both stood as soon as they saw her, and their smiles were so warm that Sarah's heart began to race. Memories of their intense camaraderie in the army made her chest tighten. These were bonds that time could not break. "Sarah," John called out with a broad smile. "You haven't changed a bit, except maybe your hair." She laughed as she embraced him. "If I'm the same, then you are too. It's such a joy to see you both again, my friends." Carlos shook his head, genuine happiness on his face. "I can't believe we're all together after so long. I thought this day would never come." They sat down, still smiling. It felt both strange and wonderful. It had been 5 years since they last met. Conversation began slowly, each sharing news and talking about where life had taken them. Sarah tried not to dive into heavy topics right away, but it wasn't long before she felt the need to share how civilian life was treating her. I thought leaving the army would be easy, but the transition has been far more difficult than I expected." She fiddled with her straw, unable to look her friends in the eye. "I've tried working in a few fields, but nothing seems to fit. I can't stay in one place for too long." Carlos gently rested his hand on her shoulder. "I understand. I thought that once I returned, I could put all my combat medic experience to use. Instead, I only managed to get a job as a paramedic, and honestly, I don't feel whole doing it. There's a lack of resources and proper conditions, but we keep trying." John set his cup of coffee on the table with a distant look. "I'm working in construction. My knee isn't too happy about it, but I manage. It's all so mechanical, though I don't feel like I have a purpose. At least in the war, we had a mission, no matter how horrible it was." Sarah sighed. "In the end, I think what I miss most is you guys, that camaraderie. We trusted each other so completely, knowing someone always had your back." They fell silent for a few seconds, lost in memories, until John tried to break the tension with a joke. "Remember that time when the supply truck broke down, and we had to survive on MREs for 2 whole weeks? I'd be happy to eat an MRE right about now instead of this limp burger." Sarah laughed, caught up in the memories. "We even used to compete to see who could make an MRE taste better." Carlos took a sip of his soda. "I always won, of course. I'd add some hot sauce, and just like that, it turned into a feast. Nothing beats a good Latin spice." Their laughter filled the room once again, their banter returning as if time had never passed. However, the relaxed reunion was abruptly cut short. The sound of a loud crash at the door made everyone turn at once. 2 masked men entered, brandishing weapons. The first held a Remington 870 12-gauge shotgun. The second carried a Glock 9mm. People near the counter began screaming, some diving to the ground, and panic quickly spread. A shot was fired upward, tearing part of the ceiling, the sharp, brutal sound sending everyone into further hysteria. An employee dropped her tray, eyes wide with shock. "Everyone on the floor now," shouted the man with the pistol. "I want the cash from the register and everything of value. Hand it all over now." Sarah's heart pounded. She recognized this type of situation. The training she'd received back when she joined the army kicked in instantly. John and Carlos also straightened up, as if an ancient instinct had been awakened. They exchanged looks. No words were needed. They'd done this many times before, identifying threats, analyzing weak points, and acting. People began crawling under tables as the man with the shotgun waved his weapon around while shouting incessantly, "Anyone who moves dies." "I'm not kidding." John leaned closer to Sarah and Carlos, whispering without moving his lips much. "They're jittery." "That's both good and bad." Carlos nodded in agreement, keeping his head down. Sarah took a deep breath, absorbing every detail. She tried to stay calm, though it was impossible not to feel the rush of adrenaline coursing through her veins. In her line of sight, she saw a mother clutching her crying baby, the woman's eyes filled with desperation as if pleading for a miracle. They needed to act before a tragedy unfolded. "Let's do what we know," she murmured to her friends. John gave a slight smile, recalling past missions. "Just give me the signal. I may not be as quick as I used to be, but I can still take one of these jerks down." Carlos exchanged one last look with Sarah, silently confirming he was ready. Then they waited for the right moment. The bandit with the shotgun was waving his arms wildly, shouting at the cashier to hurry up with the money. The other rushed between tables, yelling and gathering wallets and cell phones. As the man with the pistol passed by their table, he looked directly at John, who raised his hands in a feigned surrender. His body trembled slightly, as if fearful. However, as soon as the robber turned his back, Sarah whispered, "Now." John grabbed a tray from the table, and with all his strength, hurled it at the assailant's neck. The man barely had time to react as the metal struck him, sending him reeling. Dazed, he spun around to see where the attack had come from. But John was already in front of him and, like a bolt of lightning, delivered a powerful right-hand punch that connected squarely with the criminal's chin. The impact was enough to knock him out. Instantly, his body crumpled to the floor, and the pistol slipped under one of the chairs. The robber with the shotgun, startled by the scene, turned his weapon toward John, but Carlos was faster. On impulse, he lunged and grabbed the shotgun's barrel, yanking it upward. A shot rang out, hitting the ceiling and showering pieces of it to the floor. Sarah had already moved swiftly into an advantageous position and grabbed the assailant from behind, applying a rear naked choke. The attacker struggled briefly, but was subdued within seconds. Sarah, a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, executed the move flawlessly. It all happened in just a few seconds before an audience frozen in shock. Cries and sobbing ceased, leaving an overwhelming silence. People stood still, unable to believe that 3 individuals had managed to neutralize 2 heavily armed robbers. Sarah and Carlos secured the unconscious criminals on the ground. John, still panting and feeling his knee protest, went over to his jeep to grab a rope to tie up the thugs. A woman who had been hiding behind the counter began to cry, thanking them aloud. The mother with the baby pressed her child close, sobbing with relief. Soon, others rose, approaching to help. Someone called 911. Sarah tried to calm the mother, speaking softly and assuring her that it was all over, and they were safe now. When the police siren sounded outside, Sarah's heart raced once again. The adrenaline still pulsed in her veins. Officers stormed in, weapons drawn, only relaxing when they confirmed the threat was under control. John quietly munched on his burger while Carlos finished his soda, as if nothing had happened. Sergeant Bradley, a burly man with a stern expression, immediately recognized John and Carlos. They had worked together in a veteran support program in the area. "Am I going to lose my job at this rate?" joked the officer as he holstered his Glock. He glanced at the tied-up, unconscious robbers. These guys picked the wrong place to rob. John shrugged. Their behavior was way too erratic. "We didn't want to risk anyone getting hurt." Carlos agreed. They made a lot of noise, but they were amateurs. Sarah, however, could barely smile. The tension was beginning to subside, yet she felt a slight tremor in her hands and legs. Even though she was used to extreme situations, it had been years since she'd found herself in something like this, especially without a uniform, without her unit. Still, in a way, she felt strangely whole, as if she were back doing what she was born to do, protect. After a few minutes, things started to calm down. The police took statements, examined a scene, and a paramedic checked on Sarah, John, and Carlos. No one required further medical attention. People approached them, thanking or looking on with admiration. It felt like a movie scene. Some children, still frightened, saw in the three a kind of action hero. But Sarah just wanted to finish what she had come for, reconnecting with dear friends and maybe feeling a little less lost. Once the chaos finally gave way to a more relaxed atmosphere, Sarah, John, and Carlos returned to their table. They were breathing easier now, still processing what had just happened. A few timid employees offered free meals as a token of thanks. Carlos picked up a cheeseburger and took a bite, smiling wryly. All that action has left me starving. It felt just like the old days. John chuckled, massaging his own hand. I've forgotten how much it hurt to punch someone without gloves. Sarah looked at the two of them, feeling warmth in her heart. She recalled all the times they had been together in risky situations, but now there was a difference. They were at home in the United States. There were no orders from an officer, no pre-planning, just instinctive reactions to protect innocent civilians. It was the essence of what they'd once done in faraway countries, only now in their own community. For a moment, she analyzed her own feelings. She had long felt disconnected from the world, as if she had no purpose outside the army. But seeing people's gratitude and realizing that her skills could still save lives gave her a sense of belonging she hadn't felt in years. The officers came by again for some routine questions. One of them even remarked, laughing, "Maybe you guys should teach us self-defense. Haven't seen moves like that in a long time." Carlos shook his head. "We'd rather not get back into another combat zone. We've had enough already." Sarah smiled softly, but the officer insisted on thanking them. "If it weren't for you, something far worse could have happened here." "Thank you." When the patrol cars finally took the robbers away, the restaurant slowly returned to its routine, albeit with a changed atmosphere. After a while, Sarah looked at her friends and tried to lighten the mood. "I knew our reunion would be memorable, but I never imagined it would be this memorable." John burst out laughing. "Yeah, and here I was complaining about my knee. Looks like I can still dish out a good beating when I need to." Carlos finished his soda in one long gulp, deep in thought. "You know, being here, doing this, reminds me that we haven't stopped being who we are. Our uniforms may be behind us, but what we learned isn't." Sarah nodded, a small lump forming in her throat. "It's comforting to know I can still count on you guys, that we can still work as a team when it matters." They sat in silence for a few seconds, each absorbing the experience in their own way. Life went on around them, but it was undeniable that this scene would remain etched in everyone's memory. Every now and then, someone approached to thank them once more, praising the courage of the trio. Some even tried to strike up a conversation, curious whether they were police officers or something similar. John would simply nod and say, "We're veterans," which was enough to elicit respectful, admiring smiles from many. Finally, when they felt ready to leave, Sarah stood up with a lighter heart. She was exhausted, yet she also felt a sense of purpose and peace that she hadn't felt in years. Looking out the window, she thought about how a day meant for a simple reunion had turned into yet another mission. Just as she was about to open the door to leave, a lady tapped her arm. It was the same woman who had hidden behind the counter during the robbery. Her eyes were brimming with tears. "Thank you. You saved so many lives today. I'm the mother of a veteran. He served in the Navy. Thank you so much. You're heroes." Sarah quickly embraced her, at a loss for words. "We're not heroes. We just did what we had to do." "That's exactly what heroes do," the woman replied with a smile. Stepping away, moved, Sarah's heart filled with gratitude. Such gestures meant more than any medal she had ever received. Carlos and John were already outside, checking on their cars. Sarah joined them, and for a few moments the three stood chatting about when they could meet again, this time with less adrenaline and more time to catch up. They began to say their goodbyes, agreeing to exchange messages to work out the details before parting ways. Sarah stopped between the two, her expression sincere. "Just know that today I felt alive again. Not because of the violence, but because I know you're still here with me." "Thank you." John patted her shoulder. "We're in this together, Sarah. We always have been." Carlos smiled reassuringly. "We won't wait another 5 years to get together. Promise." They embraced, and Sarah headed to her Jeep, feeling the warmth of the sun on her face. She started the engine and drove off slowly, casting one last glance at the restaurant that, who would have thought, had become the stage for something so intense. What mattered was that she had rediscovered a part of herself that had been missing. In that moment, she felt more than ever that she wasn't alone in the world. She carried with her the certainty that her place still existed, even after so many years away from the battlefields. Now, with John and Carlos by her side, she had the strength to face whatever came next. After all, they were still a team, a family. And although the war had ended for them, life still held challenges. But now she didn't have to face it all alone. Out on the road, under endless skies, the weight we carry never leaves our eyes. Dust of the desert, echoes of the fight. But home's not the same when you sleep at night. They ask if the war is far behind. But it's in our hearts, it's in our minds. The flag still waves, but so do scars. Some battles are fought beneath the stars. We held the line, we bled, we pray. For the ones beside us, the price we pay. It's more than a rank, it's more than a name. It's the bond that keeps us in this frame. Brothers and sisters stand side by side. Through the storm, through the fire, through the fight. We may hang up our rifles, but not our hands. 'Cause we live for each other, brothers and sisters. The world moves on, it turns so fast. But we hear their voices from the past. Heroes in silence, burdens we bear. But when one of us calls, we're always there. It's the look in their eyes across the room. The silent promise that chases gloom. We don't need words, we all declare. A heart that beats like only family can. We held the line, we bled, we pray. For the ones beside us, the price we pay. It's more than war, it's more than the same. It's the life we swore, hand in hand. Brothers and sisters stand side by side. Through the storm, through the fire, through the fight. We may hang up our rifles, but not our hands. 'Cause we live for each other, brothers and sisters. Brothers and sisters stand side by side. Through the storm, through the fire, through the fight. We may hang up our rifles, but not our hands. 'Cause we live for each other, brothers and sisters. We live for each other through every command. Forever together, brothers and sisters.